It all started with an old house at the edge of a quiet village, surrounded by dense woods and cliffs. The storm hit unexpectedly, but something far darker came with it, a disappearance that left everyone stunned. The question remains, what truly happened that night? Welcome to Chilling Realms. Today, I'll tell you one of the strangest and most terrifying stories you could hear. It's about an old house, a storm that never stopped, and a mystery that no one could solve. For friends Elysiad, Rami, and Mark decided to take a break from their chaotic lives. They wanted to escape to a remote place far from the world to clear their minds. After some searching, they found an old house deep in a secluded village, nestled between towering trees and the ocean cliffs. The house, though ancient, had an eerie charm. Its weathered walls and creaking floor seemed to whisper something forgotten. Despite its age, it felt like the perfect spot for a peaceful getaway, far from the stress of daily life. The journey to the house was long and winding, the road narrowing as they approached the village. The air grew heavier as the sky darkened, and the trees surrounding them grew thicker, almost closing in on the path. When they arrived at the house, the atmosphere was unsettling. The house stood at the edge of the forest, with no other buildings nearby. The air felt still, almost suffocating. The innkeeper, an elderly man, greeted them at the door with a warm smile, but his eyes held a deeper, unsettling knowledge. "Stay within the village when the storm comes," he warned them. "The coast can be dangerous when it rises. Not all travelers return after a storm." They thought it was just an old man warning, something to add to the house's mystique. But the unease lingered in the back of their minds as the storm began to brew. The wind howled, shaking the windows, and the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs grew louder, almost deafening. As the evening settled in, the four friends sat around the fireplace, talking and laughing. But as the night deepened, the storm only grew more violent. The wind rattled the windows, and the sound of the waves seemed to have a life of their own, crashing against the shore with increasing intensity. It felt as though nature itself was angry, as if the storm had a purpose beyond just the weather. Mark, always the adventurous one, decided to step outside. The others warned him about the storm, but he shrugged it off. "I'll be back in a few minutes," he said, his voice full of confidence. But minutes turned into hours, and there was still no sign of him. The storm had grown worse, and the others started to worry. The wind now howled with a chilling force, and the trees outside bent under its pressure. The house, once a refuge, now felt like a trap, its walls creaking and groaning. As the hours passed and Mark didn't return, Ziad, Rami, and Ali grew frantic. They called out his name into the storm, their voices swallowed by the wind. The night felt unnaturally quiet, like the world outside had disappeared. They gathered their flashlights and set out into the storm to search for Mark. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, and the wind pushed them back with each step. The forest around the house seemed endless. They called Mark's name over and over, but the only response was the roar of the storm. There were no signs of him, no footprints in the mud, nothing that could tell them where he had gone. They combed the forest, each of them feeling as though they were being watched. The deeper they ventured, the more lost they felt. Eventually, they gave up their search and returned to the house, drenched and exhausted. The storm outside still raged, but inside, the house had become even more suffocating. The warmth from the fire had faded, and a chill seemed to settle in the air. They called for Mark once more, but there was no answer. Something felt wrong, far more wrong than just a missing friend. It was as if the house was hiding something, as if it was trapping them. They decided to search the basement, a place they had avoided earlier. The air grew cold and musty as they descended into the basement. There, in a forgotten corner, Ali found an old, dusty book buried under some old crates. Its pages were fragile and yellowed, but the writing was still legible. As they flipped through it, they realized it wasn't just any book, it was a journal. It spoke of people who had stayed in the house in the past, people who had vanished without a trace. The storm was always a part of it. The journal described how the house would call the people during the storm, drawing them in and never letting them leave. The more they read, the darker the house seemed to become. The temperature dropped, and a strange pressure filled the room. It was as though the house was reacting to the words, to the knowledge of its past. The journal warned that when the wind howls, the house wakes up, and those who stay during the storm would never leave. It didn't just take lives, it took souls, binding them to the house forever. Suddenly, they heard footsteps from above. Mark, but it wasn't the Mark they knew. He appeared at the top of the stairs, his face pale and his eyes wide, but there was no warmth in his expression. His body was stiff, as if he were no longer in control of it. "You shouldn't have stayed," he said in a voice that wasn't his. "It's too late for me now, but you can still leave Run. Before they could speak, Mark turned and walked away, his movements slow and unnatural. The group followed him up the stairs, but by the time they reached the top, he was gone. The house was silent again, but it was a silence that felt unnerving, as though the house itself was waiting for them to follow. They rushed to the door, desperate to leave, but the door wouldn't open. It was as if something's unseen force was holding it shut. The house was trapping them. The storm outside howled even louder, and the house began to shake, as though it were alive, responding to the storm. The whispers grew louder, as if they were coming from within the walls, urging them to stay, to become part of the house. In the early hours of the morning, the storm finally ceased. The sky cleared, and the village outside was eerily calm. The sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the house, but inside, everything was still. The house had absorbed the events of the night, hiding them behind its walls. The group packed their things and left the village, their minds heavy with the events they couldn't explain. The last words of Mark echoed in their minds. Dante become part of the storm's eternal cycle. As they left, the innkeeper appeared at the door once again, smiling. But this Chimmy, his smile was different, more knowing. You saw it, didn't you? Guy asked. They nodded silently, knowing that whatever had happened to Mark, whatever force lived in that house, was not something they could ever understand. The house doesn't let go, the innkeeper said softly. Some things are meant to stay hidden. Some stories are meant to remain untold. The group left the village without a second glance, but the house, the storm, and Mark's warning stayed with them forever. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more chilling stories. Stay tuned for more tales that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew.